Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood? An afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
Happy heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real. This is Aeon, Byte, Gnostic Radio, and this radio has been killing the Orthodox video star for over 4 years. You have materialized at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West, dream meets attainment, and reality meets endless and savage reinterpretation.
Well, I've wrestled with reality for 35 years, Doctor, and I'm happy to state I finally won out over it.
Formerly known as Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, and once broadcast at the Caliphates of Jihadist Atheism, Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio is presently broadcast through the GodAboveGod.com, as well as Progressive Blend Radio to a worldwide audience. This is your incessant exploration of the world's favorite, yet least known heretics, the Gnostics and their brethren in the Esoterica, as well as their space marine allies in the free-thinking dystopias. We shy away from scholarly pontification and definitely stay miles away from the spiritual herpes of New Age babble. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything.
What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
This is where you can finally be more than you've allowed yourself to be for the first time in so many lifetimes across so many solar systems. This is a dream of you, that ship smoke on the horizon, so don't play hard to get. And as always, I am Abraxas, that terrible god above god as the ancients knew him, the Ultraman of all solar logos, in his mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor in the cement Gehennas of Chicago.
If I owned this place in hell, I'd rat this place out and live in hell.
Welcome with kindness and love. Welcome to the machine, my son, and the means to escape it. Welcome to your anamnesis, or Greek for loss of forgetfulness, where you will remember who you were before your soul was tied to the body of a dead mammal, as W.B. Yeats lamented, rudely buried in the tomb that is the body, as Plato snarked, or sentenced to the Alcatraz that is your flesh, as Basilides bewailed. Like Jesus Superstar in the Gospel of Thomas says, congratulations to the one who came into being before coming into being.
You have always been here.
Thus you know now you must find a way out of the kenoma, Greek for emptiness, and the term the Gnostics used in the context of the emptiness that is the universe, the emptiness that is your life, and the emptiness that is your bloated ego when it comes down to it. Now that you've begun experiencing anamnesis, open your third eye, and felt your chakras ignite like Pentium processors, you realize it's all empty.
You're not afraid of the dark, are you?
The ancient Buddhists said the universe is mostly vacant space, and modern science agrees with this these days. It's all empty, my beloved true seekers, unless you consider the pie in the sky, sweet flatulence slithering out of the golden anuses of Jehovah and his angelic mafia. Or as the gospel of truth says, that fog of error that puts us into such terror we become hopelessly ignorant.
And while you're jumping from one foot to the next, what is he doing? He's laughing his sick fucking ass off. He's a tight ass. He's a sadist. He's an absentee landlord.
Well, it's almost empty. There are Lilliputian seeds of light in the void of mere being that can be irrigated into divine meaning if we tap into the oceanic dimension we originally came from and for some reason fell from, a place beyond all the heavens and hells some have called the pleroma, or the fullness of the divine, the all. But first we must dissipate this fog, and it will take more than materialistic masturbation, self-important emotional ejaculations, or fleeting orgasms of religiosity.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
Anamnesis, also known as Gnosis, or the Philosopher's Stone, or the Holy Grail, is what will rent the veils that cover the inner sanctums of the temples of our holy perception. Allow us to see those light seeds within and among all things, and gather them so that they may be watered until they sprout into etheric vines that will lead us up beyond the Kenoma.
There must be some kind of way out of here.
And in the meantime, we will also learn that life is a bridge to cross and not build upon, as the Sufis say, and that you must become a passerby, as the Gospel of Thomas states, or an allogenes, or stranger to the multiverse, as many Gnostic writings hint at.
Sometimes you have to lose yourself before you can find anything.
Lastly, and before you can climb the etheric vine, once it has matured, you must accept its time for one last, or perhaps one of many journeys to the crucifixion of your dead mammal body. Anamnesis has told you that. There is no other way, my beloved true seekers.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
And to find a way to irrigate the light seeds and increase your anamnesis, you come every week to the virtual Alexandria to listen to the sages of sacrilege and the saints of blasphemy. You want the heresy they offer, Greek for choice from right thinking or straight thinking, because you are tired of the sanity in numbers fallacy. You're tired of being well adjusted to a hopelessly sick society. Like the Stoic philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius once said, the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane.
Are you like a crazy person?
I'm quite sure they will say so.
And this journey to your crucifixion of your dead mammal body, this descent into blessed psychosis, this loss of forgetfulness, this tending to the light seeds, is exactly what we will be discussing in this eternal now. And our sage of sacrilege and saint of blasphemy is none other than one of the greatest Gnostic masters in all of history, who took not only a voyage of anamnesis, but one of total recall. And this individual, who may also be one of the greatest esotericists and deep thinkers of all ages, has finally left a pregnant instruction manual on perhaps how we can do the same. His name is Carl Gustav Jung.
Now answer my question or you'll be standing tall before the man.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
The what?
The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
We've dealt with him and his spiritual astronomical ideas in oil spill abundance here on Aeon Byte, from the words of Gnostics, occultists, arid scholars, pagans, skeptics, Orthodox Christians, and more. There's not much more we can cover on the lush harvest of psychic liberation Jung left behind, although I'm sure we shall continue in future programs.
The lady doth protest too much.
But perhaps the keynote of this father of death psychology, this Gnostic mage, this Spartan artistic mystic, and postmodern prophet is something called the Red Book, although Jung entitled it Liber Novus, or New Book in Latin. Many believe it is not only the font of all his magisterial concepts, but the very atlas that every human being can follow to become individuated, whole, or, in other words, having that total recall to access the living and baptismal waters of the pleroma that will germinate the light seeds.
That's now. In an hour he could have total recall.
Jung himself said, "All my works, all my creative activity has come from those initial fantasies and dreams." And those fantasies and dreams is what he inserted into the Red Book. Finally published in 2009, a new adventure has begun for those who seek cosmic liberation, it seems, just as exciting as when the Nag Hammadi library was finally translated.
I'm going to show you a world without sin.
And I can't think of anyone better to discuss Jung's Red Book than our astral guest on this approximately Saturday, July 17th, the year of our Demiurge 2010. And that is none other than Stephan Heller, author of Gnosticism, New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing, Jung and the Lost Gospels, Jung and the Seven Sermons to the Dead, and Freedom, Alchemy for a Voluntary Society. Heller is also Bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica in Los Angeles. For more information on his myriad metaphysical enterprises for the betterment of Gnosticism proper and improper, please go to Gnosis.org.
Wow, is very nice.
There cannot even be a homunculus piss spot of doubt that Stephan Heller is one of the most important, groundbreaking, and pioneering scholars in the field of Gnosticism. And he is certainly a colossus in Gnostic theology. From him, I learned that one could be controversial, bloody but elegantly funny, and politically incorrect, while still being a truth-seeker warrior of the most serious and mystical pedigree.
To protect the sheep, you gotta catch the wolf, and it takes a wolf to catch a wolf, you understand?
It would take hours to cover the asteroid impact Stephan Heller has had on unearthing the secrets of this ancient of ancient heresies, and all accolades in the end would be little more than Saudi Arabian justice.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison?
I have met Heller several times, enjoyed his lectures, broken bread with him, and even attended a Gnostic mass he led. And in those moments, I knew that the transformer energon of Gnosis transmitted would be blazing bright in this and future generations, just as Jung's energon blazes even brighter with the publication of the Red Book.
This tape is a lightning bolt from God. It can change things that need changing before we all go off the end of the road.
Beyond that, Heller has graced Aeon Byte back in our introductory series, episode number 2 to be exact, and ironically on Aeon Byte number 59 to discuss the life and esoteric donations of C.G. Jung. On this third honoring of Aeon Byte, Stephan Heller explained Jung's own journey into anamnesis, into the deep water horizon well of the collective unconscious, into the heart of darkness and the dark night of the soul, into the realm of archetypes, mythopoeia, forgotten gods, and reoccurring prophecy. And this was not some SpongeBob fantasy world, my beloved truth seekers, but a place more real than real, almost the ultimate reality, the borderland between the Canoma and the Pleroma, to be exact.
Buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
It's a place where, if dared, we must battle stellar lords and arcanic gatekeepers, the worst lamias of our nature, black knights of insecurity with their lances tipped with our own grimmest fears.
I move for no man.
But it's also a place where our truest dreams linger like sexually frustrated princesses needing rescue. Our angelic ambitions await like those weird-looking birds from the movie Heavy Metal to take us into a soaring flight. And our very own souls, that self that was us before we came into being, sits by the doorway of the Pleroma, or the eternal realm of the Sethians. And he or she is usually holding a bucket full of that living and baptismal water, my beloved truth seekers.
Free your mind.
So many great mystics, shamans, and gurus have gone that far and returned, sometimes at the cost of their faculties. The difference is that Jung didn't come back babbling about a new religion, startling his disciples with apocalyptical omens, or start speaking like Yoda. Being a doctor and scientist at heart, he hid the scalpel of analysis and basically and meticulously dissected what he had experienced, learned during his journey into what the Valentinians call the Horus, the border between the ideal world of the Aeons and the world of forms of gods and mortals.
Trust the gods, Leonardo. I prefer you trusted your reason.
He did what Dante, Enoch, the midgets from Time Bandits, Kiefer Sutherland in Flatliners, the Sethian Elders, and the Merkaba Kabbalists, and others have done, by not only being Jesus, crossing the heavenly heights and descending into the labyrinth underworlds, but also being a Didymus Thomas, recording each image with scribal passion. And this became Liber Novus, or the new book.
I think you just became my personal hero.
Although it must be stressed that ultimately this was Jung's own personal expedition into his Empyrean karmic fulfillment, his initiation into becoming a bodhisattva. The truth is that the Red Book, and Heller will address this, is perhaps one of the ultimate astral GPSs that can take us into the borderlands, the divine imagination, the collective unconscious, or the Horus. But enough of my drivel. Stefan Heller on C.G. Jung's Red Book. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. Although remembering can be quite a pain in the Ganesha ass, I must say. This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure and honor to have back Dr. Stefan Heller. How are you doing today, Dr. Heller?
Oh, quite well. I'm happy to talk to you.
Always a pleasure having you back. Before we delve into the actual contents of the Red Book, could you tell us when Jung wrote it, and why did it take so long for this fabled book to become available to the general public?
Well, the first question is rather easy to answer. He began writing it, or writing the material that came to be incorporated into it, on the evening of the 12th of November 1913, and he kept it up at various intervals for about 5 years, although the main material was pretty much done by the end of 1916. So that's, the chronology of the writing. As to why it had taken until 2009 to publish it, now that's actually more a matter of guesswork than anything else. But what we know fairly well is that he agonized over it during his lifetime, particularly the earlier period, as to whether he should publish it in some fashion, and then decided against it. And then really what he did, almost you might say, instead of that, he utilized a great deal of the information and inspiration that he received during the period of time indicated, and which he wrote into the Red Book, and funneled it into his other psychological books. So that it's really very fascinating to me at the present time to, after having studied and lectured on the Red Book, to go back to his psychological works, or at least many of them, and discover there the material really in slightly transformed manner of the Red Book. So the Red Book was the inspiration and in the source of a tremendous amount of his subsequent writings, but he felt that there would be very little comprehension and very little appreciation for the Red Book itself at the time of his life. Then he died, of course, in 1961, and the family, primarily the head of the family, his son Carl Jung, with whom I had some correspondence and who was very gracious to me, as I mentioned later on in other contexts and others, the family felt that it should not be published, that their father's idea was the right one, and they kept it in seclusion. They kept the book in seclusion. And it wasn't really until about 15 years ago that a historian, a gentleman who is a historian of psychology, Dr. Sunu Shamdasani, developed a great interest in the material, and he befriended the family, and he, with a great deal of difficulty, persuaded the family to allow him to work with the material, to edit it, and to prepare it for publication. And so finally, last October, the book was published.
Yes, and I've heard that one of the reasons Dr. Shamdasani used was that he told the family that there were actual partial copies of the Red Book out there, and that it could be mistranslated or misinterpreted. Especially at the time, there was an American psychologist named Richard Knoll who was painting Jung as an Aryan cult leader. Or something.
Richard Knoll, who wrote two very hostile and in part inaccurate books about Jung. And Shamdasani defended Jung very cogently at that time on the internet and otherwise. So he endeared himself to the family. And you know, by this time, the Jung family consists really of the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of Jung. Franz Jung, the son, had died a few years ago, and I think one or two of the daughters are still alive, but it's really the latest generation who was much more open to this. And Dr. Shamdasani also said to us, I know him, and we met several times here in Los Angeles, he felt that really since the time of Jung's life, and now so many things have happened. There has been such a change in much of the consciousness of at least certain strata of the population, that the possible acceptance level has really risen tremendously. Because we went through the 60s, we went through, many things, and it is now possible for this work, I think, to be appreciated by a much larger number of people, and certainly the reception that it is receiving seems to bear that out.
Yeah, because it seems that the Jungian community had some resistance towards this publication. Have you seen any damage done to them? Are people screaming out?
Not, it's still pretty early. But if there are people in the Jungian community who are unhappy over the book and its content, they have not said so thus far. So but we are not just dealing with the Jungian community here, but we are really dealing with the general public, which has responded to the publication of the book and the availability of the book with tremendously. There is an exhibit of the Red Book that is touring United States at the present time. It has been for several months in New York City. It has been here in Los Angeles and just left, and is now at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And in each and every case, the public response was overwhelming. The various museums where it has been exhibited had expected a certain number of people, and the visitors and the attendees, their number has vastly outstripped all of the expectations. So the response is really tremendous, and I think to a certain extent unexpected.
And Dr. Heller, what really compelled Jung to write the Red Book? It seems a short answer is that he needed to go on a voyage basically to find his own soul, his own individuation,
yes,
or perhaps the map of individuation itself.
Yeah, well, that's certainly how the book stands, but actually Dr. Shamdasani's introductory material and his footnoting is very informative concerning many of these issues, so I would advise anyone who has access to the book to really not just read the text itself, but read these explanatory materials as well. But Jung had outgrown really psychology as it existed at that particular time. He had outgrown Freudian psychology, and he had left the Freudian school, and he was on his own. And many feel now that it was really the kind of experiences that went into the Red Book that made him break with Freud rather than the other way around. So Jung had lost faith in really many of the underpinnings of the psychoanalytic discipline as it existed at that time. And it would seem that this opened him up to certain deeper influences and certain deeper insights. And then these started pouring into his mind, beginning, as I meant, in November 1913 and continued from there on. So that I think it was really largely an internal psychic pressure of forces that were within him, or let's say that he had access to, that drove him into these experiences and into keeping notes of the experiencing, writing them down, which then subsequently went into the book.
And what he basically did is he went deep into the unconscious, knowing that there was a risk. I mean, he was traveling the borderlands where lunatics and great artists go to, but at the same time, he dared this experiment so he could record it.
Yes, and he, like so often, let's say the people of religious or spiritual inspiration really don't have much of a choice once the forces begin to move. You have to move with them, but it is risky to resist and it is risky to go along with it, both. But Jung was a very remarkable man who managed to handle this, immense internal transformational journey in a very sane manner. He wrote mostly at night. He still kept a full practice of patience. He met with fellow analysts. So during the day, and of course he had a growing family already, had a nice house in Zurich, and his wife and his children, and so he took care of all of that, all of his normal responsibilities, and then did his journey in the inner world, so to say, in addition, and at a different time of the day. And some of this the way in which he handled this and the way he kept at least one foot in the physical world, so to say, I think was to very great advantage of him, and he thereby, I think, avoided some of the difficulties that often have arisen in connection with visionary people who then just really fall into the internal abyss and have a very hard time coming back from there, or maybe don't come back from there at all. And then, in any event, psychoses and various things of that sort obtain.
And didn't he use something called the active imagination? What is the active imagination? Yeah,
well, active imagination was the term, the concept that Jung developed in the wake of the Red Book. Basically, he felt that what he was doing while having these visions and commenting on them, because that is really, if you look at any chapter practically of the book, you will find that there is a description of visionary experience or experiences, and then there are Jung's evaluations of the experience and commentaries upon them in every chapter, which is also very unusual in visionary literature. Because what you get with visionary people is usually that they are so overawed by their experience that they don't feel that they can really comment on it at all. Sometimes they are forced to comment on it later, but Jung did it simultaneously practically. So, when you look at that, you see it there. The active imagination is actually the process whereby he obtained these experiences. He subsequently named it active imagination. In fact, the first thing that he wrote after he finished the Red Book was a longish essay which deals with the active imagination. He, at that time and for a number of years thereafter, he advised his students and his patients to engage in this active imagination, which they often actually refer to sort of in an abbreviated word as visioning. And it is still a practice that exists in Jungian circles, but it for a variety of reasons which I'm not really aware of, only but a few of them, it has been sort of lacking in emphasis for quite a number of years. But active imagination was the practice, the technique, whereby he acquired these visions, and so he felt that other people, those who were psychologically ready for it, could really do the same thing. Because it's important also to keep in mind that he insists that the experiences in the Red Book are his experiences. They are not the experiences that would come in the same manner to anyone else, that they are personal to himself, and that people would have to get their own experiences of the deep psyche in their own way. He merely could really show them the way and indicate a certain way in which this has been done. But the active imagination was really, that was the way in which he obtained the material that went into the Red Book.
And it seems that the book starts, I see it as a series of initiatory journeys. Probably the most important one is, of course, he goes down into the cave, into the underworld of the unconscious, into the world of archetypes and mythology. There he meets Elijah and Salome.
After a while,
it seems to me Salome seems to be perhaps one of the most important gatekeepers, because it seems to me she represents wisdom in a sense.
Salome, once again, it's probably largely up to the interpreter how to see these things, because Jung doesn't explain them that much. But Salome is, I would say, primarily a wisdom figure that is very highly conjoined with feeling and with love. So initially, Elijah stands sort of for a much more mental and less emotionally involved approach to the wisdom, who is, as he states at one point in the book, who is really only interested in prophecy. Elijah is only interested in what's going to happen in the future, but Salome is interested in love, and in the manner in which the power of love and feeling and emotion and so forth works into the transformation. But, Elijah and Salome, important as they are in the book, they are not the main instructors. They definitely act as initiators, and there is a particular big symbolic initiation described there, which somehow Richard Noel had gotten a hold of that, some of that description, I think out of some private seminar that Jung had given, and where he recounted some of these experiences. And that is where Jung finds himself tied to a cross, and there is the serpent who crawls up on the cross. He has the face of a lion, and Elijah and Salome are standing by, and that is sort of one of his truly big initiations in the book. But it's not the only one. It's probably the first one as you go on in the book that really has a tremendous amount of affect, a tremendous amount of drama with it. But then after that, really the big hieratic figure, the big initiator and teacher, is another figure altogether who is called Philemon. And Philemon stays with him and continues to teach him right up to the very end of the book, and even into the portions that he did not put into the book, so-called the scrutinies, which Dr. Shamdasani then included at the end of the book. And that is, I think, a very, very interesting figure. Probably in the long run more portentous even than Elijah and Salome, but they are all important because they indicate various phases of the transformation of Jung's psyche.
Yeah, because Philemon also has a wife, Balkis, and they're taken from the Roman writer Ovid, the myth of Philemon.
Yeah, from Ovidius, yes. Where Philemon there is a story of Philemon and Balkis, which was quite a popular one, and in fact it was incorporated. A portion of it was incorporated in Goethe's Faust, in the great drama, which of course all of the German-speaking people, including Freud and Jung, were very familiar with. I mean, even Freud never traveled anywhere without a copy of the Faust. He would always have it on his bedside. So, the figure of Philemon and Balkis in the ancient form was undoubtedly present. But this Philemon is really, he has the name, and possibly there is some association, like he would be a later embodiment of Philemon, of the Philemon of Greco-Roman lore. But it's really a much more complex and much richer figure. And Philemon then really becomes the instructor, becomes the teacher. And Jung's relationship to Philemon changes in the course of the Red Book. And initially, he's sort of suspicious of him, and he thinks that he's only a magician. But then, as there is more and more interaction between Philemon and Jung begins to recognize that this is really a tremendously important figure.
Could you compare Philemon to his Socratic daemon, his Manichaean divine twin? Is that what Philemon ultimately was to you?
Well, possibly. I think all, at least in my, as far as my results of my studies are concerned, I think that all previous analogies break down. All of those that you mentioned are present, they are aspects of the situation. But it seems to be yet more than that. as the figure of Philemon really grows throughout the book, until at the conclusion of Scrutinies, which is the third part of the Red Book, which Jung actually did not write calligraphically into the book himself, but it remained in other manuscript form, and then Dr. Shandasani included it. But by that time, Philemon is practically a savior figure. You know, very numinous being.
And I don't know if it's in the Red Book or in the Black Book. I'm getting it confused, but isn't there a part where Philemon tells Jung in the garden that he's actually Simon Magus?
Oh yes, and that's in the it's in the Red Book in the present format of the Red Book. It is in Scrutinies. And actually, in the garden, there is a conversation between Jesus and Philemon. Jesus, who appears as a blue shade, and Philemon treats him very, very reverently and addresses him Lord as Lord and so forth. And then Jesus looks at Philemon and says something, "What are you calling yourself now, Simon?" You know, and then Simon says that Helena, who was Simon's consort in the biblical times, New Testament times, that Helena is now called Baucis. But interestingly enough, Baucis never appears in the Red Book. Unless I missed something, I don't think I have. Philemon talks about her, and she is around. But she is by no means as active in the situation as, for instance, Salome is in connection with Elijah. And Elijah kind of fades into the background as time goes on. He's sort of left behind because he's this Old Testament prophet who just wants to prophesy about the future and isn't interested in anything else, you know. While Salome, of course, is the love figure. It's also interesting to note that initially Salome is blind. She walks around with Elijah, but she's blind. And when Jung undergoes that big initiatory experience, which was, I think, one of the experiences that Richard Noel became so excited about in a negative way, then as Jung is tied up on the cross and the snake coils itself around him, and he sort of undergoes and a shamanic death, and then he looks down, and Salome is down at the basis of the cross, and she has recovered her sight. So Jung's experience restores Salome's sight, which I think is also a very interesting element, because it shows how there is a give and take, there is a back and forth, a relationship between the envisioned figures and Jung himself. It's not all a one-sided business like a biblical prophet where God speaks and the prophet listens and writes it down maybe, and that's it. But here there's always a back and forth. There are dialogues and conversations and interactions. But certainly Philemon is of tremendous importance.
Yeah, but Elijah also serves as the archetype of the human who reaches the divine while still alive. You know, the old gospel.
Well, of course,
become a Christ while in the flesh.
Yeah, biblically and Kabbalistically, certainly, because he's one of the deathless ones. He has gone to heaven without dying. Which such figures being rare, shall we say. In fact, I can't think of one that I have met so far. You know, but oh yeah, of course. But you kind of see really that as time goes on, Philemon begins to take the place of Elijah. What started out with Elijah sort of continues with Philemon. And tell you a little story about that was sort of a big revelation to me. You know, there is one painting that Jung did of Philemon in the Red Book. And it's at the conclusion of the first of a chapter where Philemon first appears. At least I think it's his first after his first appearance. And so there is that. It's really a large kind of initial of a new page. It's sort of vaguely T-shaped, and there is Philemon bearing the wings of the kingfisher and the snake at his feet, and various things that Jung had written next to the picture of Philemon. Interestingly enough, one of them being a quotation. Now get this, and if you haven't yet, a quotation from the Bhagavad Gita. Wow. In English. The only thing in English that is in the original calligraphic text of the Red Book. The only thing. And it's the quotation from the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, a well-known quotation, when Krishna says that whenever unrighteousness increases in the world, I come back to enlighten the people and to restore righteousness and restore the law. And that's written right next to Philemon. I mean, it's quite obvious question. Why would Jung select that passage? And he apparently only had access at that point to an English translation of the Bhagavad Gita, and he wrote it there because he looks upon Philemon as an avatar. In some ways, an equivalent to Krishna and other avataric figures. And then in the later part of the book, in Scrutiny, it's pretty much evident that Philemon becomes a sort of successor to Jesus. But here is my own personal little story. That picture of Philemon has been available before the publication of the Red Book. They allowed it to be published just by itself, in some books. For instance, there is a kind of a coffee table book called C.G. Jung, Word and Image, and that has the full page from the Red Book with Philemon's picture on it. All right. So I have looked at that picture for many years until finally a friend of mine here who helps me with audio and visual activities, Mr. Brian Campbell, very, very wonderful helper. I'm so grateful for his presence. He photographed some of these pictures, and then we projected them in a very much enlarged fashion during one of my lectures. Wow. And then I saw that way up on top of the picture in very small letters, there is a Greek inscription. So I studied that, and since I had a few semesters of Greek in my youth, I was able to decipher it. And it says in Greek, Father of the Prophets, beloved Philemon. So obviously the truly numinous importance of this figure goes all through the book. And there is another interesting thing that no one so far has really commented upon. I think not even Dr. Shamdasani, that right on the opposing page in the Red Book, where on the one side, as you open up the Red Book, on the left side is the picture of Philemon. On the right side is a full-page picture of a feminine figure, huge feminine figure with a partially veiled face, who stands in a kind of temple-like structure with a whole bunch of people. The temple is full of people who are looking every which way, and two sort of angelic figures up on top. And then Jung has an inscription, mostly in Latin, on the border running on all four sides, and that inscription says, the wisdom of God, Dei Sapientia in Latin, which is the same as Sophia, the wisdom of God who long ago unaccountably had gone away. And that is the feminine figure there. And there's no reference to her in the text, but this huge picture is there facing the picture of Philemon. So there is Sophia, quite obviously can't be anyone else. It's the Gnostic Sophia, but given a Latin name, as that has often been done. And the implication is that she had gone away, but she's coming back.
Wow,
and there is the picture of her coming back. She appears in that temple, and there are all kinds of people there, and Jung did this a couple of times in the Red Book, which is kind of humorous. He would draw a picture with a lot of faces on it. And many of those faces are the faces of actual people. For instance, the face of Sigmund Freud, the face of who undoubtedly was on his mind.
Yeah, not in a good way, though.
Not in a good way, no. Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, number of people. And then what he does is, like in this case, some of them are looking at the feminine figure, this goddess figure, Sophia, that has appeared, and others are looking away. And thereby he symbolically indicates that when she comes, some people will look at her, some people will accept her, and some people will not. Needless to say, Sigmund Freud looks away.
Wow, that's very powerful imagery. It reminds me of other Gnostic sages, like William Blake warning people, don't go into too much scientism and rationality, or Philip K. Dick, telling people in Valis, Sophia is returning. She is returning.
Well, you see, this is all good visionary writing has certain things in common. And the ones that you mentioned, particularly, in fact, Dr. Shamdasani frequently mentions in his comments and in his lectures that he was given the similarity between the prophetic writings of Blake and the Red Book of Jung. So there is a distinct similarity. See that now the illustrations, as they may be called, the pictures, which Jung all painted himself. I mean, this guy was a terrific artist. There are some paintings of his which don't pertain to the Red Book, which he just painted, landscapes, this and that, and some of these are exhibited on in the exhibit that is at the various museums at the present time. And he was a very, very fine artist with very little or no training. And so he employed his artistry in the Red Book, and there are a lot of pictures in the Red Book which are actual illustrations of the text. They are usually smaller, and they are usually at the beginning of a chapter, sort of like a medieval initial worked into a letter with which the chapter begins, a little picture. But then there are a whole bunch of other pictures, many of them full-page pictures, which are not demonstrably related to the text at all. There is no reference to them in the text. Many of these are mandala, gorgeous, beautiful, colorful pictures, and others. And this Sophia picture is one of them. So he is teaching, or he is giving us information, I feel, at least in the pictures, often information that is not in the text, or is only implied very slightly in the text. And one of them is, in this case, that the feminine wisdom, that Sophia is returning, along with, in association with Philemon. And so that is also present there, and this is a subtle message which is there in addition to Salome and some of the other figures that appear.
Dr. Heller, did the 7 Sermons of the Dead come out of this period?
Oh, it most definitely did. In fact, now we know something that we did not know before, and as you may be aware, I was one of the few people who walked in where angels fear to tread, and I did a translation and an extensive commentary of the 7 Sermons back in the 60s. And that's my book, The Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, which incidentally was very favorably commented upon by Jung's son, Franz, who sent me then in appreciation for my book, when the German translation came, of an original copy of the 7 Sermons to the Dead, with a handwritten letter which I have on the glass here. It's my most prized possession, bar none. In any event, yes, the 7 sermons are present in the third portion in scrutinies of the Red Book. They are in there. And Jung extracted them from there, changed them around very slightly, and allowed them to be privately published sometimes in the 1920s. And that's the 7 sermons that we are aware of. But in the Red Book, it is not Basilides or Jung who talks to the dead and to whom the dead talk, but it is Philemon. And Philemon then makes comments on the sermons. And it's an extremely, in other respects, the text of the 7 sermons is not appreciably changed. So it is the same one that we had before. But it now comes in a new context. I still think that my interpretation was on the whole quite okay and quite useful. There are a few parts now, however, where we can see what Jung really meant, because there are interpretations there. So the 7 sermons was part of the latter portion of the Red Book. And then Jung extracted it from there and published it for a few of his friends, and that was the original privately published edition in German with a Latin title, Septem Sermones ad Mortuos. Then it wasn't really published again. There were a few, I think there was another translation after Jung's death.
And then he was scolded by Martin Buber for it.
The Martin Buber affair occurred early on the basis of the privately published little copy, because somehow a copy reached Buber. I'm sure that Jung didn't send him one. He had more sense than irritating the lion, you know. But somebody, some mutual acquaintance who did receive a copy from Jung, passed it on to Buber, and then Buber really blew his stack, as he was wont to do.
Silly notion of Gnosticism being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, well, as one of the scholars, Dr. Brashler, who was the assistant to Dr. Jim Robinson here in Claremont years ago, we knew him quite well. And as Dr. Brashler once answered at a lecture at our society here, where somebody asked about whether the Gnostics were anti-Semitic, he said, no, the Gnostics were not anti-Semitic. In fact, many of them were Jewish themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
He said they just didn't very much like the biblical Jewish God. And he says, you know, I can't really blame them that much for that.
And they didn't agree. They thought Moses got it wrong. They said, we've got the right interpretation.
Yeah, that Moses might have gotten it wrong. Yeah, I mean, geez. Yeah. But that is a silly notion that has now, I think, pretty well gone out of the picture.
And Dr. Heller, did some have said that Jung's visions and torment through the Red Book were sort of a prophecy to World War I? Is that just folklore, or is there any truth to this?
Oh, no, it's like this. Before he started writing the Red Book, in October 1913, so it's the same year, but it's earlier, you know, he started having some very impressive visions, which had to do with things like a tremendous flood of blood covering Europe and so forth. And he had several of these. He was in the Swiss army part of the time, because, you know, in Switzerland everybody has to serve a period of time in the armed forces, and he was a doctor in the medical corps. Anyway, he was having these visions which were very, very ominous. Blood and fire and things like that, and he couldn't quite figure out what they referred to. And then, behold, the World War I broke out. And then he said, I know what they were about. But they were not part of the Red Book. They came before. And in fact, him having discovered that he had actually had a precognitive vision sort of reinforced his confidence in his own visionary abilities, and he no longer felt that he had to worry that these ominous visions had maybe something to do with him being having a nervous breakdown or things like that, but they actually predicted the war. And then he went into the visions of the Red Book.
And another thing is also, and I believe again I'm going by the Black Book, but he writes that he was called upon by the master, perhaps Philemon, and he was told that you are being inspired, just as Buddha, Mani, and Christ, as others, to commune with the divine. But it seems that Jung is having an argument with himself, with his soul. In the end, doesn't he refuse to be one of those and decides he is going to be a therapist who records the process?
Well, it's not entirely clear. I'm aware of the sentence that you are talking about, but I would have to look it up, and I'm almost certain that the sentence that you are quoting about Jesus and Mani and Muhammad and so forth was really a sentence that was written by someone else, by a disciple of Jung, to whom a woman, to whom he allowed to read portions of the Red Book, or maybe all of it, and that she said that, and he did not disagree, except that the implication is that while he may be inspired in a similar way, he is handling it differently from the others who have come before. That much I can be certain about, but I don't think that he ever wrote about himself that he was exactly of the same order as these previous messengers of light. But someone else said it, and he didn't disagree.
It seems his final message, or Jung's impetus, wasn't, I am an apostle of light,
no,
but I am going to show everybody how to become an apostle of light.
Absolutely, that is the truth, but he was prophesying. And there are specific prophecies in the book, and among these is that what is coming, what is happening, is a 3 stages of development of the consciousness of humanity, and they are war, magic, and religion. And the implication sort of being the war, that was probably the 2 world wars afterwards, and then magic being, I don't know, I think that maybe the computer technology is magic, At least it's magic to me. And then a religious, a spiritual dispensation would come, which is mainly centered around the fact that there is a God, there is a portion of God within the human, and the human has to discover that and has to work with that. And that's where historical Christianity went wrong, that it just concentrated on the external Savior and didn't really address itself to the God within, the Christ within, the hope of glory. And then he also mentioned in the Red Book that what will come in our time will not be an individual Savior like Jesus. In fact, I have the exact quotation here. He says, the anointed of our time will be born in the spirit, not in the flesh. And the anointed, of course, is the Christ. It's the Messiah,
Yeah, very powerful words. And
yeah.
I'm assuming that the hermeneutics on the Red Book have probably just begun, right? We still have a long way to go. It's like the Nag Hammadi libraries. We've just begun on all of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. After all, the publication has only been, by the end of last October that we got the book, and I'm sure that there are various people working on it. I am being bombarded here and there by my publishers to do something myself, but I have mainly concentrated on, you might say, the hermeneutics of lecturing so far. And I did 13 lectures on the Red Book, going through the book from beginning to end, which are available now. And I have since then given lectures on tracing the influence of the Red Book in Jung's works on alchemy and in various other works of Jung, including particularly Aeon and Answer to Job. That has been my hermeneutics so far. But maybe at some point, with some help, I might be able to combine them in book form.
Well, we look forward to it. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Dr. Heller. I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you again so much for having me, and try to keep cool in Chicagoland.
Okay, we will see you in November
and
when
we
you come
hope to
here.
see you in November.
I'll be
Okay,
there.
God bless, dear sir. See you later.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Stephan Heller injecting our 8 brains with the history contents and some secrets hitherto never disclosed about C.G. Jung's Red Book. And you know that nothing excites me more than realizing Philemon is maybe Simon Magus. After all, when I discovered I was a Gnostic, one of my first revelations brought about by anamnesis was that all roads to the Pleroma lead through Simon Magus. Maybe not, but sooner or later, more often than not, you will meet the supreme archetype for the mystagogue, hypnagogue, revealer and savior, and, well, that kick-ass 30th level wizard all parties need on any WoW quest. Or is it 60th level these days? You never know how much they upgrade this game. Anywho, and Sophia is always by his side. Or you can call her Busis, Salome, the Holy Spirit, Trinity, or Helen of Tyre. Then again, like Heller alluded to, Philemon and Simon Magus might be more. They might be a manifestation of Abraxas, who himself is the only knowable manifestation of the entire Pleroma. Again, Stephan Heller is author of Gnosticism, New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing, Jung and the Lost Gospels, Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, and Freedom, Alchemy for a Voluntary Society. Heller's also bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica in Los Angeles. For more information on Heller and his myriad metaphysical enterprises for the betterment of Gnosticism proper and improper, please go to Gnosis.org. Heller's work was certainly the mother's milk I needed when I first began reading about the knowers of the unknown, and for that I will always be grateful. And I urge thee to read his Jung and the 7 Sermons of the Dead. It's as close as having both complete Sheol despair and complete celestial grace injected into your heart all at once, my beloved truth seekers. And again, it must be stressed that the Red Book is Jung's personal interpretation of his hero's mission into the borderlands, the Horus, or the collective unconscious, where he drew from the waters of the Pleroma to irrigate his seat of light, as well as to gain total recall to dissipate the sweet farts from Jehovah's bunghole that make the Kenoma seem like Aphrodite's vajayjay. The symbols and archetypes are those he encountered and needed, as universal as they may seem to be. Some of the scenes are pretty kick-arse, I must admit, like Jung traveling the lands of the dead, falling in love with a woman he later realizes is his sister, getting squeezed by a giant serpent, and, in one terrifying moment, eating the liver of a little child, which makes the devil himself criticize him. Jung also means Ammonius, an anchorite in the desert reading the Gospel of Juan, a fat man, the hangman of the tarot, a one-eyed man, and several characters that are but fragments of his daemon or higher self. He meets Istabar, the god of the East, who Jung poisons with his modern mentality and then later resurrects with incantations. He kisses Salome, the personification of wisdom that can only be awakened by passion. And then there is Philemon in his many avatars, whose myth from Ovid you should definitely check out, and how he appears in Goethe's Faustus, screwed royally by Mephistopheles. And there's what Stephan Heller told us in the interview, and also what you can read and should read, because you should go out and purchase the Red Book and have it in your collection, right next to all the other great Gnostic literature. But again, like I've said before, The teachings of the apostles of light are important, but perhaps just as important is understanding the dangerous trails they took. And Jung was one bungle in the metaphysical jungle. You see, we are often meant to imitate the paths of Jesus, Buddha, Mani, Gandhi, Zoroaster, Hermes thrice great, Inanna, Mary Magdalene, Neo, or the karate chick from Firefly. Their phoenix destinies are often our own inner and outer epics, map quests so that we can gain anamnesis or gnosis, find the waters of the pleroma we so much need for the seeds of light. My own journey since I discovered I was a Gnostic has been brutal, but then I think of Jung's errant keel-hauling in the Red Book and realize that's just the way the cosmic cookie crumbles. Freedom is truly free, but getting there will only cost you your dead mammal body and your sanity that really isn't sanity, but actually synthetic, built in the laboratories of the Ancient of Days, Yaldi Baldi. And it should be noted that, according to Jung's Black Book, he did have a conversation with his soul once he had finished recording his visions that would later make it into the Red Book. His soul actually told him that he could start his own religion. He had the ability now. He could alter the flow of history and the awareness of humanity. But Jung decided that his destiny, that sacred duty Krishna spoke to Arjuna about, was not to be a religious icon, but a scribe of the process where one could become a religious icon. In other words, he basically did what the Gnostics did in their scriptures. He lit a flare that revealed a pathway into bringing forth your own inner logos and shine on like a crazy diamond. And more than that, as I always say, and ultimately, Jung wrote his own gospel and lived his own myth. As the Swiss magician himself wrote, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. So we continue with our anamnesis, our preparation to sojourn to the horrors for the living and baptismal waters of the pleroma. Why? Because we are the Gnostics, the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the controls to the heart of the sun. Those of us on a dark odyssey, on the seas of fate through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. The Gnostic revolution continues in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria, with Simon Magus, or perhaps Philemon, and Helen of Tyre as our patron saints. We are the revenge of the myth. We are champion eternals and legend made manifest, and we are raging against heaven. We will fight all forms of bigotry, oppression, and intolerance, not because we think we will win, which is doubtful, but because it is our sacred duty, Krishna. And most of all, like Jung and Heller, we're writing our own gospels and living our own myths. And thus we shall become both Thomas and Jesus, witnesses and saviors. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road has ended, the song is over, thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved true seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that love you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight.
The Antichrist. You get me in a vendetta kind of mood. You tell the angels in heaven you never seen evil so singularly personified as you did in the face of the man who killed you.
Hypatia of Alexandria. The revolution has begun.
You're all going to die down here.
Hypatia of Alexander.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
This is supposed to be a happy occasion. Let's not bicker and argue about who killed who.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed. Depending on the verse.
Heaven, packed with fresh souls.
Horror and moral terror are your friends.
Who are you carrying all those bricks for? God? Is that it? God? Well, I tell you, let me give you a little inside information about God.
Soylent Green is made from people.